Well, welcome everyone to another exciting edition of the Magic Sandwich Show, and you will see that we have our usual suspects, namely Thunderfoot, AronRa and Concordance, but we also have someone else who is our first caller. I'm going to save all the introductions that I would normally give at this stage until later because Daniela only has about 10 minutes spare to give us, so we're going to go straight to her and then we'll come back and talk to the others. Daniela, are you with us?
Yes, can everyone hear me?
We can indeed. Tell us your story.
Okay. Okay. I used to make videos on YouTube. I was an atheist, and now I'm a born-again Christian, and I'm really happy. And I wanted to share that with everyone that knows me from YouTube.
Talk us through how it all happened then.
Basically, I started a secular student alliance in my university, and when I did that, I started to talk to the people from the Christian group that was in my campus. They invited me for a Bible study, and we studied the Gospel of John, and I prayed, and God spoke to me, and I had a real experience with the Holy Spirit, and I just couldn't be an atheist anymore. It was like I would lie to myself if I continued to be an atheist, even if my reason told me that wasn't the right move. But like, it was
I was just going to ask, what did the voice say to you?
It wasn't like a voice. It was more like talking to your heart. You know.
Okay, I have a question myself. So you talked to the Secular Student Alliance. They showed you the Bible, and rather than show everything that was wrong with the Bible, you decided to pray, which right away I have some huge questions about that. Why would you assume the existence of a thing that the Bible you're reading had already disproved? I'm already lost there. And why would you pray to something that you did not yet believe in? I mean, before I talk to anything, I'm going to believe that it's there. And when I was a neo-pagan, I did these kinds of meditations where you would assume that the thing is there and that you're going to see it. And of course, gargoyles or whatever else it is that you want to believe in will manifest when you meditate under those circumstances. So I'm a little stunned at how you managed to fool yourself this way.
Okay. And then lots of questions, but let me try to explain. I created the secular students in my university. I was all about trying to, make people see that the Bible is just a book and all that stuff. I know all the arguments against the Bible. I read a really good book that showed some good evidences for the Bible. That was one thing. So it wasn't a completely blind faith. Okay, so I had some information that made me feel okay about being Christian. So I didn't deny my reason for that. I wouldn't go into this really deep discussion about the Bible itself, because real is not my it's not something I know a lot about to argue. I'm not gonna do that. But the evidence that people showed me was good. So I decided to pray as a test, So I didn't pray because I wanted to believe in that, but I prayed because everyone told me that God would never if a person prays with their heart and their mind, and they really want to find truth.
Yeah, then it becomes what I just said. When you pray with your heart and with your mind, regardless which God it is or which religion it is, you will always be able to manifest that spiritual entity because you are conjuring it in within yourself. So I'm not interested in that part. I know how that part plays. Once you make the assumption to the point that you're ready to play, you've already bought the story. What was the evidence that somebody gave you that was, in you, as you put it, really good? Because I'm still convinced that there is not any evidence, good or bad.
Okay, I would say that the evidence that I found was just, okay, let me put it this way. I think that if we are going to use reason and evidence, we can come to be agnostic, okay, and be like, okay, we can prove there is no God and that the Bible is bullshit, but like, it's not a good way to go either, okay? But
let me clarify. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying somebody gave you really good evidence, and then when I asked you for what that evidence is, you said that we shouldn't use evidence. Are you about to tell me now that they in fact did not give you evidence?
No.
Okay, what was the evidence, please?
Yeah, I said that I don't feel comfortable to discuss this because
that's a curious thing, because everybody that tells me that they were a former atheist turned Christian, they always say that the evidence was compelling, whatever the evidence is. And every time I've ever asked what this evidence is, it always turns out to be, well, that's a subjective thing. I'd be happy to discuss it in a private conversation, but I can't divulge it openly. And evidence, by definition, is something that you could divulge openly.
Okay, what I mean by this is that, like when I was an atheist, I would support that evolution is right, but I wouldn't sit and discuss the details about evolution because it's not something I know a lot about. So that's basically what I'm saying. I'm not going to discuss about the Bible evidence because this is something that I'm not. I haven't studied that a lot yet, and I will. I plan to. But what I really just want to tell you guys, really, I know your work. You know, I have seen your videos. I know DPR. I know Thunderfoot. I know Concordancy. I know you all, and I know that you guys are really smart. And like, I'm not here to try to. I don't think I have any tools to argue with you about reason or science.
Did I ask you? Did I ask you to argue with me? I didn't. I did not ask you to argue with me. I asked you to tell me what was the evidence. See, here's the thing. When I come out of a religious belief, and if anybody comes out of a religious belief, they list the evidence that compelled them. They can tell this. They can tell all the examples and what that means and how they understood it and how that changed their mind. But when somebody goes from atheist to Christian, so far, I've never gotten the example. Nobody's ever told me what was the thing that changed their mind. And it always turns into some subjective thing where they kind of already drank the Kool-Aid before they made the decision. So I'm interested. If I were moving out of Christianity and into atheism, damn Skippy, I would be able to give you the compelling reason to change your mind along with mine. So I'm expecting that the same rules would apply going the other way, but it doesn't seem that they do.
Okay, because I realized that the reason why I decided to go to Christianity wasn't because of reason. So yes,
okay, so it wasn't evidence. You said that it was evidence that changed your mind. It turned out not to be.
No,
okay, so we'll amend your original statement.
Well, like I said, the evidence would only allow me to go from atheist to agnostic. it would only be like it's not
What evidence? What evidence could possibly take you from atheist to agnostic? And you're using the wrong definition for agnostic, but I know what you mean, so we'll just go with that. I guess that you mean that agnostic is somebody who is somewhere between being convinced there is a God and not being convinced that there is a God. There actually isn't an in-between there. So
no, I use the word agnostic as someone who does not judge, doesn't have a stance on the
okay,
matter.
well, see, that's most of us. So what evidence would take us from where we already are to where we already are to be agnostic atheists to be agnostic atheists? Huh?
That's the point. That's the point. What I'm trying to tell you is that we can't decide this through reason and evidence, because the evidence that we all have only shows us that we cannot have an answer.
Wait, no. The evidence that we have shows us that we can and do have an answer. The evidence doesn't show us we don't have an answer. Quite the opposite. Now, when you do not base your decisions on reason, which you just said you don't base your decisions on reason, then you're not going to come to that conclusion. My decisions are all based on reason. I don't decide what to believe. The evidence decides what I will believe. It's not my choice. You apparently made a choice independent of evidence because, as you said, you're not relying on reason. And so far, every conversion to Christianity I have ever heard has always boiled down to it's not based on reason. It's based on an assumption made of emotion. I was hoping that maybe, because of your prior involvement, you would be aware of this and you would be able to give a satisfactory answer.
I think that we can make decisions that are not based on reason, but are not irrational. Like it just.
I'm sorry. Again, we're having a problem with definitions. Rational means that your decisions are based on reason. But maybe I'm using the wrong definition.
Okay. Think about if you are at home and you need to eat, and you have to make a decision. Okay, you have two places you can go out to eat, and they have the same distance. Okay, there you have to make a decision. Which place are you going to eat? They're both the same distance. You can choose any of those, and it wouldn't be based on reason, but it wouldn't be an irrational choice. The irrational choice would be stay home and die of hunger. But
you can have aesthetics, and aesthetics still be based on reason. And you can also decide whether you feel chemically aligned with curry on this particular day or not, and that'll help your decision too. It's always going to be evidence based. It's always going to be rational, at least from my perspective. I know there's some people in the chat room that doubt that for some strange reason, but that's not the case. All my decisions are based on reason. Can you give me any reason, any evidence, any excuse at all for what would imply to me that the universe is not the way I understand it to be and was actually conjured by an incantation spell uttered by a Bronze Age genie, which is apparently what the Christians believe in? See, I'm having some trouble looking at these uber galactic scale of things and trying to imagine that it was conjured by a god.
Why do you think that this God from this Bronze Age religion has suddenly taken an interest in you?
I really believe that God has really deep and meaningful plans for my life, and to use my testimony as something that will change people, because that has happened already here. And
well, Danny, if I may, this is what I find somewhat curious, because you are under the impression that your God wants you to go around and spread the message and give your testimony. But when you were asked specifically, what evidence had been provided to you in order for you to reach this conclusion, you won't tell us. Now, if it's your mission to convert us all, which as I understand it is, why won't you tell us what this evidence is?
See, that's the thing. I'm not supposed to convert anyone. That's the job of the Holy Spirit.
Well, you said that your mission, God's mission for you, was to go around and use your testimony. How can you do that without discussing with us what the evidence?
I tell people about my history, about my testimony, and that is one of the elements that will help people to make the decision to do Jesus. But it's
well, it won't, will it? Because at the moment, what you're saying sounds to us utterly vacuous and hollow, and is totally unpersuasive. And without evidence, none of us are going to be persuaded. Okay,
can we? Oh, I understand that you are probably frustrated. I would be too if I were in your place, because I used to hate Christians that didn't know how to explain why they believe in what that is. So what I really wanted to do today was just tell people about my conversion, because some people didn't know. But can we do this? You can send questions, and I will debate with you another time when I have more time to talk, because I have to go now. And I will.
Feel free to come back on a future show, and I'll include if you send me a message where you would like people to message you if they want to talk to you about it, I'll include that in the description of these videos when they are posted on YouTube. How's that?
Yes, because then I can present you some of the evidence that I saw. Because
we got evidence again?
We will have evidence next week. How about that?
Okay, so you have not so far seen evidence, but you will in the future present evidence. And that you used evidence, somebody showed you evidence that changed your mind, but you don't use evidence because you don't base your decisions on reason. Do you understand why I'm confused? Because you said we shouldn't use evidence, but you had evidence, but you're not going to tell us what the evidence is.
Look, there is evidence. I just am not able to talk about it now because I don't have enough time. And
would you like to come back on a future show and talk us through what the evidence is?
Yes.
You're more than welcome. We obviously are on every 2 weeks at the same time. Will you be able to join us next on the next show?
Yes, I would love to do that.
Okay, we'll do that.
People just find it too boring, but
no, it's okay. I think it'll be very interesting. I know you've got to get off to church, so I will let you go. But thank you very much indeed for sharing your testimony with us. And as I say, hopefully we will see her again in 2 weeks' time on our next show. She did indicate to me, I wasn't being rude there, she did indicate that she only had 10 minutes before she had to go to church, and she actually gave us 18 minutes. So hopefully she will have more time on the next occasion. So let's move on. We will start with Thunder, who I know has an announcement that he wishes to make, and then we'll move on to other topics as well. Thunder.
So, as many of you may know, the YouTube community, especially on the secular scientific front, has been suffering from what I would call attrition. And the number of people making videos is in a bit of a decline. And just looking around, when was the last time you made a video, Aaron?
I've been a little occupied of late.
DPR, when was the last time you made a video?
I think it was probably September.
And Concordance?
Thursday of this week.
Really? I missed that. Oh, man.
Resentment Clinic.
I'm sorry. In which case, I'm really sorry. You have been productive, and I missed it. Yeah, breaking the run. Okay. But anyway, what we want to do is we want to encourage people to actually become active and make videos, especially people who are good at it. And so I'm basically going to use all the donations that I got last year to run as prize money for a competition this year. The competition is going to be broken into 3 provisional segments. Each one will have a first prize, a second prize, and a third prize, 2 third prizes of $1,500 and $250 respectively. So for the first quarter of this year, there'll be 1 competition run. For the second, third, 1 competition run, and for the third quarter, 1 competition run. The judges that I've got lined up so far is Eugenie Scott from the National Centre for Science and Education will run the first quarter. The Richard Dawkins Foundation, run by Elizabeth, or the primary judge will be Elizabeth Cornwell from the Richard Dawkins Foundation for the second, and for the third one, it'll be the Thinking Atheist. So each one of those competitions will have a theme to it, and those will be decided by the judges. So I've appointed the 3 primary judges. They will in turn decide. They'll be joined by 2 other judges, and between them, they will actually make up the rules for what will determine who wins. And then after the first 3 quarters, there will be 12 winners in total, and they will get to compete in an end-of-year shootout. The end criterion for entering the competition is that you must make at least 2 videos over that quarter. They have to be new videos. They have to be at least 5 minutes in length. Oh, sorry, maximum of 5 minutes in length, and submitted before the deadline. Judges will announce what the criterion of the judging will be. And yeah, hopefully that will actually stimulate some new people to actually join the video making community to actually get some good quality media out there.
And I think you're missing one of the really big pluses for this, Thunder, which is Eugenie Scott will watch your video. I mean, that's pretty awesome.
Not only that, but you're the potential for winning a competition for which Eugenie Scott is the judge. Which is, well, come on, that's bragging rights.
And then, of course, the promotional value of maybe a new video maker.
And on top of that, yeah, any winner who wants it gets to take a sort of lap of honor, if you like, on my channel. So they can put their winning video up there, and hopefully that will breathe some more life into our community. So in total, it's about $10,000. But that's actually broken into essentially four competitions. First prize, well, like I said, it's $1,000. Second prize, $500, and then there'll be 2 third prizes of $250 each.
I think also you wanted to invite people to come up with a suggestion for the name.
Yeah, I've yet to come up with a decent, catchy name for this. So if someone can actually think of a decent, catchy name for this video contest, that would be great. So if you've got good suggestions, put them into the chat, 'cause I'm watching the chat now.
You can also, we'll put up a post on our website, the Magic Sandwich, the www.magicsandwichshow.com, and you can also leave it there or send the ideas or suggestions to Thunderfoot directly on his YouTube channel.
You heard a voice concordance? That's the first step.
I'm converted. I'm converted anyway. I'm renouncing atheism.
Yes, do you want to tell us why? What argument it was that converted you?
It's brilliant. I mean, you can't stand up under its withering brilliance. I'll have to find the link and post it in 1 minute.
Well, whilst you're doing that, whilst you're finding that video, and in fact, we might even have the technology to send it to Ben to be played, if Ben is agreeable to that. But whilst we're sorting that out, let me make reference to the link that is above the chat. It's a link to a Facebook page, and as you see, it's called Free Ben Baz. Ben Baz is someone who lives in Kuwait, and until early January of this year had an active website and blog site where he posted his beliefs, which were atheistic beliefs. However, as a result of that, he has been arrested. He is currently in prison and is due to face trial towards the end of February. What I would invite everyone to do, if they're willing and minded to do so, is to visit that Facebook page. You'll have all the details that are relevant there. And please support the campaign that has been launched, as you'll see, under the name Free Ben Baz. I think that it is a disgraceful outrage that even in the 21st century, people can be arrested, locked up and prosecuted simply for their harmless, peaceful beliefs. It is a disgrace. If you happen, as many people and more people seem to be doing these days, downloading the audio file from iTunes or the website, the links will be included on the web page. So, as I say, it's www.magicsandwichshow.com. If you would like to support, if you're listening on audio and would like to support, please go to that website. It'll be under the announcements pages or even on the front page. And please do what you can to help the campaign Free Ben Baz. I've got another announcement, but I'm going to save that a little bit later because I think concordance. Are you ready to tell us this persuasive argument that you have heard?
Well, no, it's all visual. You have to watch the video. Now, I have put the link here if you guys could post it into the chat, or if we can find a way to stream that.
This is the argument. Everything which begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Now what do we know about this cause? Well, because it created space and time, it must be spaceless and eternal. Because it is eternal, it must be unchanging. Why is this? Well, you cannot have an infinite number of events. It must be immaterial because matter is constantly changing at the atomic level. It must be unimaginably powerful in order to create this vast universe. And finally, it must be personal. Now why must it be personal? Well, an eternal cause cannot create a non-eternal effect without the intervention of a personal mind. So here we have a spaceless, eternal, immaterial, unchanging, unimaginably powerful, personal creator of the universe. God.
Yeah, well, I mean, the obvious problem there is you can rephrase the Kalam cosmological argument to prove that God doesn't exist, or that the universe doesn't need a creator. So it's all about the subtle wording that everything that exists needs. Oh, hang on, give me a second. Everything that exists.
You see how Thunderfoot's logic is wilting under the weight of this magnificent argument. He can't think straight anymore.
Yes.
Checkmate, atheist.
Here we go. Everything that exists began to exist. God, by definition, never began to exist. Therefore, God does not exist. I think that's right. Everything begins to exist, and it needs a slight changing. Everything that it begins to exist, everything that exists began to exist. Therefore, nothing that doesn't begin to exist exists. Therefore, God does not exist. I think that's it. You've got to be a little more subtle with the wording, but.
Yeah, I thought it was more like this. I mean, since we have what I've often brought up about the Cartesian coordinate system and time being an asymptote where 1 second equals infinity when t equals 0, then we know that even at the point of the Big Bang, we know that the beginning is itself infinite. So even though it is a beginning, it is also infinite, so it never actually began to exist. Meanwhile, God is an adaptation of a Bronze Age deity called Yahweh. We know exactly how he began to exist. He was one of the 70 children of El, and was taken from all these Sumerian religions and was concocted and then exaggerated to infinite extremes. So there's, again, proof that the universe is eternal and God does not exist.
Well, I have only one response to that as a newly converted Christian, and that is, nuh-uh.
You've got two, haven't you, concordance, if I may. Your second one is that the very rules that you've just used to argue that the universe had a cause, you also have to say don't apply to your God for reasons which you cannot explain.
I mean, obviously, yeah, he's eternal. I mean, that's sort of built into it. Because of course he's eternal, and
this is
he didn't have to start to exist, right? So because he didn't have to start to exist, he can make things start to exist. So he's eternal. He's outside of time, which only exists as a factor of space. But he's still outside of that, so we don't have to worry about that.
That's the other thing that makes me laugh about that little video, is it says that God is unchanging, and anything that never changes can actually do something. Right, because that would involve changing. So the unchanging being can never create anything because that would involve changing.
Yeah, but you're forgetting,
he was always a burning
the rule that God can do whatever he wants to do, Thunderfoot. You're looking at this through blinkered, scientific, rationalistic, imperialistic glasses. You need to put your Kenham biblical glasses on.
This is the thing. I think Concordance has it right. I can't see why I didn't see it before. Outside of space, in the space outside of space, and in the time outside of time, there's a burning bush.
Exactly.
I don't know why I didn't see it before. It's so obvious.
Well, I'm going to bring in our first caller and see if we can get some sense into the show. This is Zach, and he has a question.
Wait,
so I understand about evolution. Do carry on as I bring him in, Concordance.
Yeah, I just want to plug my appearance next week. I don't know if it's actually going to work. I'm putting a lot of faith in True Puka, but discussion with PZ Myers next week online. And that is February 2nd. Time and location to be announced. Keep an eye out for it. But the topic is trolling internet free expression. And just generally free thought blogs policy towards free expression.
Zach, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. So basically, I just wanted to ask a question about how genes evolve. So based on articles that I've read, like this one, it says human populations differ one from another almost entirely in varying proportions of the allelic genes of the various sets of hereditary factors, and not in the kinds of genes that they contain. So I was just wondering, like, if in modern populations things like regulatory genes and indels and kinds of genes don't really change very much in modern populations, how do they evolve in the past? Is it just that it takes very long for them to evolve, or?
First off, we know about 30% of new genes are the result of viral sequences. These are basically, viruses are escaped genes. They're genes that have evolved to have their own life. But the genes themselves are actually competitive within the genome. They compete with each other. And the only reason they cooperate is they're more successfully passed on to the next generation. But where do they come from? Well, about 30% of them we know probably come from viruses. And these are viruses which entered the cell, found it nice and cozy there, and decided to set up housekeeping. The other genes in the genome said, it's like the lazy roommate who never does the dishes. But all right, he's paying the rent. And then you have some that are neo-functionalized, and that's a term you can certainly look up. Neo-functionalization is a process by which random sequences can be adapted and then evolutionarily pared down. So the junk DNA is actually the non-coding sequences can be turned into genes with the addition of whatever it is they're missing. And then, of course, that's at some percentage, and I won't give you a number. And then, of course, there's gene duplication. There must have been probably a primordial or a first gene. And that first gene was the archetype for everything to come beyond that. It was probably co-evolving with the first transcription factor. And that first gene was then duplicated. And gene duplication is something that does happen. The majority of gene duplications are more or less silent until they become noticeable or they diverge from each other and begin forming two functions. But those are the three processes that we are aware of that result in the formation of new genes. Allelic changes, of course, can arise other ways, and I won't talk about it. But we have viral origins, or horizontal gene transfers. We have neofunctionalization of non-coding sequence, usually. And then we have gene duplications and whole chromosome changes. And indeed, entire genomes have been duplicated detectably in the recent past. And a number of your genes exist in fairly high copy. And if you were to lose one, you probably wouldn't notice. But very often, things like trisomies, aneuploidies, changes in total chromosomes will result in an organism which is still functional but has a new phenotype. I'll give you examples: strawberries or bananas. And I'll pass it off to Thunder.
I really don't have much to add to that. It's basically the viruses are the places where you can get that there's much more plasticity to change in viruses, and there are the retroviruses that actually then can insert those sorts of genes into the human genome. So you can get this sort of the genes are prototyped elsewhere, if you like, and then inserted into more, I'm going to say, sophisticated organisms where they can be repurposed, or where they tend to be repurposed. But I think your question, which is the majority of evolution in large creature type populations occurs by different populations of genes. Yes?
Okay, well, there are also things like regulatory genes that I've read that they were sort of active millions of years ago, but they aren't really active in modern populations. Like, for example, in the evolution of early primates, there were changes to the regulatory genes, but in like modern ape populations, and even the evolution of ape populations, like, you know, the great apes, the regulatory genes haven't really changed in a long time.
Let's define some terms here, Zach, because I think you might be misusing the term. A gene is usually the functional unit in the genome that can produce a protein. So if you're talking about genes which encode a regulatory protein, a protein which turns things on and off in the cell, then that's still just a gene. What it does later doesn't really mean anything. It's an address, right? Like if we had a street address. It doesn't tell you whether it's a business or a personal or a P.O. box, whatever. All you really get is that it's an address. What you may be talking about are regulatory elements, which are themselves sequences of DNA, which are not used to make proteins, but they still serve a function in turning genes on and turning genes off. And as you can imagine, you can lose these short regulatory sequences. And all that does is change the amount of the protein which is made, or under what conditions it is made. But if you change the protein coding sequence, the gene, and that's what we really should be talking about, then you're talking about making a new protein. Usually that is deleterious. In the vast majority of cases, if you're altering the protein, it's going to have a phenotype. It's going to have a change unless the gene exists in multi-copy, in which case you may emerge with a new function. So let's back it up just a bit and make sure we're talking the same language, Zach.
Okay. So I'm not sure exactly what the difference between a regulatory gene and a normal gene is, or just like.
Let me jump in here for just a second. Yeah. I mean, Concordance had given me a number of peer-reviewed references that I thought were fascinating, wherein you were talking about in the development of the great apes and how this hasn't changed very much at all. When you isolate humans in that equation, there are a number of primate genes that have actually been switched off in us that we're supposed to control, like the amount of muscle mass that we have in our jaws. And the reduction of that muscle mass, either in our jaws or in our body-wide systems, has been one of several factors that were implicated in our developing brains, in the size of our brains being so much larger, and the skull being able to expand the way that it did. With gorillas, for example, they have these massive jaw muscles, and the construct of the skull is such that with this muscularity, it is impossible to develop the brain beyond an infant's scalp, which is something that we have thanks to a switched-off regulation gene. There's a lot of the primate-specific, or there's a lot of the primate genes that we had for regulation that, when deactivated, were assisted in producing us. So we are, in many senses, a collection of broken monkey genes.
So are you saying that evolution may actually have a limit in what it can do, or sort of like...
Well, there's always going to be a limit, depending on the number of base pairs that you have. But I mean, just to cover a point that you raised earlier that I think you're a little confused about, the difference between developmental genes and normal genes. With creatures like humans, there are a lot of genes that turn on and off during the growth of the organism that then don't do, those are the developmental genes. They don't do a lot once you're fully grown. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not
there
sure
are limits. There are limits to evolution when you talk about generalization versus specialization. A very generalized life form can go a lot further than specialized ones when the environment becomes dynamic. That's the only limit of evolution that I'm aware of.
Zach, I feel like you're trying to ask another question. You just haven't gotten to it yet. Is that right?
Yeah, maybe that's true. So I'm not exactly sure how do the developmental genes evolve? I'm not exactly clear on that. That's
a good question. I mean, that is a good question. A lot of the genes that are involved in turning other genes on and off, we're talking here about the proteins called transcription factors, have modularity. We see that certain elements are conserved. For example, every one of the transcription factors has some common DNA binding domain, like a zinc finger protein. That's one of my favorites. And that zinc finger protein binds up a zinc, which binds to a particular sequence of DNA and either turns it on or turns it off. And you can imagine how that evolved if you think about complexes of genes that found ways to favor themselves. So again, you have to think of both competition and cooperation. But the ultimate goal of each gene is to get itself passed on to the next generation. So as much competition as we see between organisms, we also see competition within the genome, between the genes, basically. And those transcription factors, each of the genes that it controls has a particular recognition sequence that allows it to be turned on at the right time by this transcription factor. The most likely reason why all of them have these conserved domains, these really conserved sequences that let them do a job, is that they are duplicated from each other. So many of the transcription factors exist in lots of copies. And you can imagine that if we messed up one of them, we still have the functional copy, no big deal. But what if the new one happens to coincide with turning on certain other genes? In development, that could mean, for example, a change from an animal that is basically hexapedal, that has 6 legs, to something that only has 4 legs, right? Or it could mean that the brain genes get switched on a lot longer in one animal versus another. And that can have negative consequences, but of course, as shown in our evolution, it can also have positive consequences.
So does it take... Are just the chances of these events very unlikely, and so the amount of evolution that's taken place when you compare modern human populations hasn't had time to sort of, or is it just the populations are too small?
No, this is happening all the time, Zach. If you look in the genome of anybody, pick a random person off the street, you will find that the diversity exists all the time. What differs between us and, say, primitive hominids, earlier hominids, I should say earlier, sorry, is the selection. how many of those variants have to die? We have very poor selection criteria right now because we've managed to make life livable for everyone. We're not red in tooth and claw. We're not struggling to survive every day. And so the diversity always exists. What we're missing today that we had then was a much higher level of selection because people died. They didn't reproduce. They had much more strict environmental stressors.
So because there's no pressures that select for different genes, there's more like random fluctuation in
there is an element here that I think needs to be added, and that's the total population size. If you have a very large population size, genes cannot propagate very efficiently. You know, a novel gene takes a long time to propagate through the whole population, whereas if you have a very small population, then genes can propagate through the whole species relatively quickly. So, I mean, there is this irony. It's only when you're closest to extinction do you have the most potential for evolution, that you have the most potential for having new genes doing new things, spreading through the entire population very quickly.